Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to NYU's AIG lecture series. This is the 12th in the series. We had a brief pause for a year or two, and then we started back in full swing. This is the second one, and we hope to have speakers, high-profile speakers, thought leaders, corporate leaders, academic leaders in the field, talking about something that's highly relevant to cybersecurity. But first, let me introduce to you our dean, Yelena Kovacevic. Yelena, of course, being the dean of a great engineering school like NYU Tandon, has all the credentials and the laurels and the awards and the qualifications needed to be a dean. A very accomplished person, so I won't bore you with those details. What I'll share with you more is what we at Tandon, me, my colleagues, and our students have seen her accomplish. In a short period of 4 years, she has made a tremendous impact on Tandon. We've improved in our ranking significantly. We've hired many new excellent faculty. We've built new labs, new centers. We have, and one sort of key aspect to Yelena's contribution has been this whole notion of student first. So she has really made a dramatic impact on the students' experience here at Tandon, and it's really great to see that happen. And I'll stop at that, and with love, admiration, and respect, I present to you, Yelena.
Thank you, Nasir. Okay. I do show up, so you're going to make me cry, so I don't want to cry in front of this entire audience. That was the nicest introduction I've ever heard, and love, respect, and admiration goes both ways. Thank you all so much for joining us for the 12th Tandon Cybersecurity lecture. You'll see that cybersecurity is prominently placed behind my head. If you can read in this in tiny letters in my Venn diagram, which is our areas of research excellence. Today's lecture focuses on cloud computing, which is being increasingly adopted, and as a result, having greater implications for security. And I'd also like to thanking AIG for their generous ongoing sponsorship of the series, which began back in 2017. Not only is this subject fascinating, it is really something that we are working on from multiple angles, be it wireless communications infrastructure, open source software development, or safe software update protocols via remote servers. Tandon faculty are dedicating to keeping the cloud safe, just as they have been at the forefront of the cybersecurity field for more than 2 decades. Cloud security is a key component of the research at our NYU Center for Cybersecurity, our interdisciplinary research institute dedicated to training the current and future generations of cybersecurity professionals and to shaping the public discourse and policy, legal, and technological landscape on issues of cybersecurity. With close to 20 faculty members overseeing dozens of PhD students and postdocs, the center serves as our university's hub for our expanding cybersecurity community across NYU. I'm proud to say that we were one of the first places to award degrees in the discipline, and we are now offering several highly regarded programs, including our signature Cyber Fellows online masters with over 800 students pursuing a technically rigorous engineering program, and a master's in cybersecurity risk and strategy, a really unique collaboration with NYU Law. In addition, acknowledging that there are too many jobs in cybersecurity for the current pipeline of students to fill, we established the NYU Tandon Bridge program, which provides individuals who might lack traditional technical expertise to gain entry into a master's program in a related field with a foundation they need to take on the challenges of a cyber STEM graduate program. The Bridge program provides a unique pathway into our MS programs and those of other schools, and its acceptance by several partner universities increases the volume and inclusivity of trained professionals for the cyber workforce of tomorrow. And if I may, as Dean, toot our own horn, though last year did some of it, we are one of the few schools to earn a triple distinction for excellence from the National Security Agency. We also work in tandem with industry partners to help keep our research relevant and curriculum updated. The faculty are too many to name, and our faculty and student accomplishments are too vast to mention, but witnessing their achievements firsthand has made me feel confident that while the threat landscape is constantly evolving, we are developing a new generation of professionals extremely well equipped to keep us safe. I need to thank Ramesh Kari, Nasir Memon, and Joe Kaminer, and of course the entire team that helped put this event together. I also want to thank Phil Venables, a member of the Cyber Fellows Industry Advisory Council, as well as our NYU Tandem Board, who has demonstrated a commitment to working with us and our leadership to support the school while being dedicated to keeping our cybersecurity offerings on the cutting edge. Thanks for all you do for us, Phil. So whether we are all friends or you're just getting to know us, we're grateful to have you here. I know that you're eager to get on with the panel and Phil's talk. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Christina Dorville, Head of Governance and Engagement at AIG. Christina, over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Dorvier, and I am here actually on behalf of AIG's Chief Information Security Officer, Rich Beish. AIG is a proud partner of the NYU Tandon School, and also we serve as an industry council member for the Cyber Fellows program. We really value our partnership with the Tandon School to bring their master's program to our own organization, and are proud to support this unique online educational program to help our own employees with their career advancement. As you heard, we're also a proud sponsor of this great lecture series, and because I know Phil Venables, you're in for a real treat today as we hear his perspective on our topic, cloud security megatrends. In quoting Phil, who, if you aren't aware, let me just make a quick shameless plug that he doesn't know I'm about to do. He has a great website, www.philvenables.com, which has a lot of very insightful thought pieces. But in quoting him, he has said that megatrends are long-term, large-scale forces that shape the world around us. They are driving forces that have tactical consequences and also manifest at a strategic level. In identifying and following megatrends, it is possible to plan further ahead, take advantage of these epic forces, and to position yourself to ride these in the right way. So today, you're going to hear about that related to cloud. Cloud migrations are obviously a priority for many organizations, AIG included, and in part that's due to the increase in remote work, as well as the focus on modernization, and as we also are working to create efficiencies. While of course there are many advantages to cloud migrations, there are also some critical security risks and threats to consider. And who better to talk to us about those risks than the Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Google Cloud, Phil Venables, who I now have the great honor of introducing you to and giving you a little bit of background from his bio. So Phil is a specialist in cybersecurity, cloud services, enterprise risk, technology risk, and business resilience, with significant expertise in multiple industries and geographies, from in-depth engineering all the way to board-level management. Prior to joining Google Cloud, where I had the great honor to know him, he was a partner at Goldman Sachs, where he held multiple roles over a very long career, initially as their first ever Chief Information Security Officer, a role that he held for 17 years, which basically makes him ancient in CISO years. In subsequent roles, he was the Chief Risk Officer for the firm's operational risks, an operating partner in their private equity business, and a senior advisor to the firm's clients and executive leadership on cybersecurity, technology risk, digital business risk, and operational resilience. In addition to this, yes, there's still more. Phil was a board director of Goldman Sachs Bank. He also serves on the Information Security and Privacy Advisory Board of NIST and is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He has quite an impressive resume. But in my mind, and most importantly, he has always been a very visible and well-respected leader in the broader financial services sector. And speaking for all of us, where I am actually coming to you from, we just finished up our quarterly financial services sector coordinating council meeting. We have very much missed him at those events and engagements, so I'm excited to be here today to hear him speak. So as always, I look forward to hearing his remarks, and so I hope you'll join me in welcoming Phil Venables. And with that, Phil, over to you.
Great, thank you. So, what I'm going to talk about today is, as we described, these cloud security megatrends. The reason we first wrote these down was really in response to the question, is cloud more secure than an on-premise environment? And now you probably kind of expect me to give the answer as like by default, coming from a cloud provider, the answer to that is yes. But in reality, it's as I think most of the audience will know, it's more of a nuanced question that a poorly configured cloud environment can have significant exposure, and if certainly there's many lines of responsibility between the cloud providers and customers, and so no matter how secure the cloud provider is, it certainly can be misconfigured to leave openings. And then similarly, if you go to the other extreme, it's entirely possible, and in fact there are numbers of on-premise environments that are maintained at very high levels of security. But generally speaking, when you look across all of that, it's fair to say that cloud is generally now more secure than on-premise. And I'm going to go through a few of the examples of that. But generally speaking, when you look at the base level of control that's built into cloud infrastructure, from the network through the hardware up through the software stack, you're seeing a degree of control and security that's not typically present in on-premise environments. And even if it is, it's certainly not as pervasive as it is in a cloud environment. So, and look, you could say from a cloud provider's perspective, why is that? Well, it's because we invest a lot in this. Some of you may have seen last year, we and the other cloud providers, but I can just speak for Google, we announced another $10 billion of investment in cybersecurity over the next few years. And again, that's an immense amount of investment to improve security, not just on our platform, but also for the benefit of people that deploy to the cloud. And then similarly, it's not just because we have thousands of really good security engineers, even though we do, and many of which are world-class experts, in their field. So those propel cybersecurity in the cloud forward. But really, it's not the whole story. And when we thought about this more deeply, the fact that cloud is getting more secure and getting more secure than typical on-premise environments is as a result of these megatrends that I'm going to go through. And as we talked about in the introduction, a megatrend is really just one of these kind of unstoppable forces that are a kind of a dynamic of the world we live in. And again, just before I proceed on this, I don't doubt there is a number of cynics in the audience that will say, well, hang on a minute, here's the chief security officer of a cloud provider talking about how great cloud security is. Like, where's the surprise in that? And so one of the things I'll just get out of the way straight away is I don't believe these things because I work for a cloud provider. I happened to believe these things before I joined the cloud. And in fact, as I've been thinking about this over the last few years, in my old role as an enterprise CISO and risk officer, consuming multiple clouds, not just Google Cloud, but also AWS and Azure, I started forming this view and these views that led me to actually want to go work for a cloud provider to start doing my part to drive these things even further forward. So I'll just kind of get that out there straight away. So it's so I kind of declare my kind of conflict of interest straight away and say that I was thinking of these things before working for a cloud provider. And so in terms of the megatrends, so I'm gonna essentially what they are, and I'm going to go through them in detail. But essentially, it's economy of scale, shared fate, healthy competition in the industry, cloud acting as a digital immune system, software-defined infrastructure, the increasing deployment velocity, and the simplicity of the environment. And I'll, there'll probably be some reaction to that because those that you've interacted with the cloud, will understand some of the complexity, but I'll explain that later. And then finally, the fact that you can, you can also kind of manage sovereignty and sustainability in an easy way. So let me start stepping through these things one by one. So if we go to the next slide, please. So economy of scale. So, some of you that have heard me talk in the past know that I've been this kind of believer in the fact that to really improve security, we've got to raise the baseline by reducing the cost of control. And so essentially the way we make progress is by making security easier, but also reducing the cost of that. One of the great things about hyperscale cloud providers is the scale we operate at means we can make significant security investments and amortize that unit cost over a very large fleet. So the unit cost of security keeps decreasing. I'll give you an example of that. So, we build most of our own server networking and storage equipment. And in our server infrastructure, we invested a lot of money building this thing called the Titan security chip. And that's embedded in all of our infrastructure in each of our servers. It provides a cryptographic root of trust, as well as a platform for doing boot validation and firmware validation, so that the operating system, hypervisor, and other infrastructure that sits on top of that not only has the cryptographic root of trust, but is having an assured secure boot. That's an incredibly important thing, as I think probably all of the audience appreciates. That was an incredibly expensive investment, relatively speaking, but we're able to amortize that over a large fleet. And so the individual unit cost per server of that more advanced security capability is quite low. And it's certainly lower than what you would typically have to spend to upgrade your on-premise infrastructure to have such a pervasive, secure boot, updated firmware control environment. And that's just one example. There are many other examples where we've invested in commoditizing encryption technology, making it universally available. So all of our storage, all of our network communications are all encrypted by default. And this is not something that people have to pay for. This is just intrinsic to the environment. And again, this is another example where, for most on-premise environments, certainly not all, but for most, it's a big effort to have encryption of all storage done by default, of all communications, both at the network level and the inter-process communication level. That's a tremendous investment. You get that as part of typically running in the cloud for many parts of the environment. And again, that's for the simple reason that we've invested up front to make that available, because the unit cost across a very large fleet is lower and lower as we continue to scale. So economy of scale works in favor of reducing the unit cost of control and security, which means more people can have security and control. This works like many of the other trends. This works in the opposite direction in shrinking on-premise environments. Again, some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, this economy of scale is only working in one direction at the moment, and that's in favor of large-scale environments that can reduce the unit cost of control. So if we go to the next slide, please. Now, shared fate is an interesting one. And so you're all probably very familiar with the shared responsibility model of cloud, where the cloud provider provides the security of the base infrastructure, and the customer running on the cloud is responsible for the configuration. And in fact, many of the more well-known security breaches associated with cloud use has been mostly to do with misconfiguration of controls that expose, for example, storage buckets or other infrastructure. Now, I think it's fair to say, and we're not immune from this, that historically the cloud providers have used the shared responsibility model to kind of not be as helpful as they possibly could be with customers. And so we came up with this notion, and and I think you see similar language from the other cloud providers, that we want to move from shared responsibility to shared fate. And what this really means is reaching across that line of shared responsibility and really partnering with customers to do a few things. One, to radically increase the secure defaults in what products are shipped. So we're essentially shipping with full safeties on. And if a customer wants to ratchet that down, then they can. But what we don't want to be doing is to have to immediately ratchet that up. We do a pretty good job on this. Like I mentioned before, encryption is on by default. There's many other quite significant controls that are on by default. I wouldn't say any of the cloud providers are perfect in this, and I think we're all working pretty hard to look at those defaults. Other things that we do is provide blueprints, highly opinionated guides around how the products should be configured. And these are not just kind of checklists and white papers. These increasingly come with configuration code so that people can actually use that to directly stand up a secured landing zone for how they build in the cloud. And there's many other things, but the other final thing worth mentioning on this section is, and again, this is, I think it's unique to us, but certainly the other cloud providers are working on this as well, is we also backstop a lot of this with discounted cybersecurity insurance in partnership with Munich Re and Allianz as the two insurance providers that we work with. And the background is that because they've inspected our environment, And we have a tool called Risk Manager where customers can export their configuration to the cybersecurity insurance company. They're able to give preferential underwriting and make available more insurance capacity because they have the ability to understand the environment and have some knowledge about the underwriting process. And that's another example where it's kind of shared fate between the customer and the cloud provider. The next slide, please. The other thing is healthy competition. So again, and I'll just kind of mention the three major hyperscale cloud providers, but there's clearly many other cloud providers around the world and domestically in the North American market as well. So, and I think what you find with all cloud providers are competing very heavily on security. Most of the prospective deals that each of us bid for, one of the main criteria for success in winning that customer business is security. There's obviously many other things like features, cost, performance, resiliency, but security is often the primary requirement as you would expect. And as a result, you see a huge amount of competition between the cloud providers to add new security features, to add new security management capability, to add more defense in depth, to validate and evidence their controls as well as their compliance to various different certification schemes. And again, for the first time in my memory, when you look back at the traditional on-premise enterprise software and hardware market, you didn't see the same competition, the same investment to outcompete everybody on security. It was typically, there wasn't that level of energy in that market. Whereas in cloud, it's like a day-to-day activity where we're all seeking to improve security to be even more competitive in the face of customer demand for higher levels of security. And that's a fantastic dynamic that, as I say, we've not traditionally seen historically over the past few decades in the on-premise enterprise software and hardware market. And I think this healthy competition is going to continue. Next slide, please. The next one is this notion of cloud as a digital immune system. And so what do I mean by this? And again, I'll just speak for us, but the same thing applies to the other providers as well, is we ship hundreds, sometimes thousands of updates a month of new features, not just in security products, but security features in all of the hundreds of products that we have. We're also pushing out new lines of defense based on our own vulnerability and threat research, where we're staying ahead of attacks. We're also fixing issues that have been reported to us through our own vulnerability research and our bug bounty programs. We're also adding in features that have come from many sophisticated security teams in our customer base, as well as many other sources of threat and vulnerability research. So the net effect is we're pushing out hundreds of these updates every month. And so for customers that don't have sophisticated security teams, in many cases, just sitting back and taking every single update they get lets them tap into this global ecosystem. And so it's like a rising tide lifts all boats. You can take advantage of the collected knowledge and expertise of a large ecosystem driving security forward by just taking every update you can get. And again, that's another dynamic that I think, especially the speed of which this kind of ecosystem drives these upgrades and drives the transparency around what needs to be upgraded, is something that, again, I think is unique compared to what we've traditionally dealt with in more traditional on-premise environments. Next slide, please. And so, again, many of you will know that cloud, and to be fair, cloud-like on-premise environments are a software-defined infrastructure. So, what that means is you get to declaratively specify what you want your environment to look like in software and configuration code. And then the cloud orchestration or other build systems instantiate that configuration in the cloud. The reason this is important is not only so you get to specify policy and your configuration and validate that policy as meeting your risk mitigation objectives, but you also know that that becomes deployed in reality. And there's many systems that will continuously compare what you've intended to deploy with the reality of what's been deployed. And this is really, really important for continuous control monitoring, because again, as I think many of you will know, most of the more interesting breaches are not necessarily a result of some never seen before attack. They're usually as a result of an organization mistakenly failing to sustain a control they'd previously implemented that has left an opening for attackers. And so the notion of continuous control monitoring, to continuously know that the controls you expect to have are in fact deployed and operating effectively, is absolutely crucial for enterprise security. And that's easier to do in a software-defined environment because you can more easily continuously inspect the configuration and look to see if it's actually configured in the way you expect. And then from this comes a whole bunch of other positive effects. So again, many of you will know about the immutable infrastructure pattern. So if you're deploying infrastructure according to a software-defined configuration, you rarely have your people inside production systems with privilege, because anytime you want to fix anything, you're actually fixing the configuration and deploying something new over the top of what was previously deployed, rather than manipulating the configuration in production with people with privilege. So a side effect of software-defined infrastructure in the cloud, and again, to be fair, in on-premise cloud-like environments, you're able to have a whole bunch of other positive effects, like the reduction in privilege, which has many, many different benefits around insider risk reduction, as well as lateral movement risk reduction. Next slide, please. So the other thing related to this is around increasing deployment velocity. So one of the things, the scale that we operate at, and all of the products that we provide and how we operate the environment, we have to continuously update our software. We're continuously driving our software forward through continuous integration and continuous deployment. And this deployment velocity that's intrinsic to how to run a cloud essentially makes its way through into customer products, because we have no other worldview than doing continuous integration and continuous deployment with all the requisite controls and checks to be able to do that at speed with limited operational risk. And that makes its way through into all of the products that you use to build, test, and deploy software in the cloud, which is great for organizations, because as we all know, a faster deployment velocity means you can push updates quicker, you get less resistant to updates, which means you can fix vulnerabilities and patch systems quicker. And so deployment velocity, as numbers of research studies have shown, is one of the key indicators, of leading indicator of whether you're actually able to maintain your environment, reduce vulnerabilities, and continue to improve configuration. So again, the intrinsic nature of high deployment velocity in the cloud makes its way into products, which makes its way into how customers refactor their software so that they can drive deployment velocity quicker. Next slide, please. Now, here's the interesting one. So simplicity. So, some of you watching this now who've kind of sat down at any one of the cloud providers' consoles or configuration screens and thought, how is this simple? Well, let me kind of walk back a little bit and give you the example why simplicity is one of these mega trends. So, and some of you on the webinar today, may have had this experience, others may not. But when you go back and look at a more traditional, large-scale on-premise environment, it's rare that any one person is exposed to the total complexity of that. So in any large distributed system in an on-premise environment, you have software developers, systems administrators, operators, network admins, storage admins. You have a whole range of different architects and engineers and test engineers and administrators, and a whole range of people, not least the various different security engineering and security operations teams. And collectively, all those people work on that distributed system, but rarely is there one person that has to deal with the whole environment. And so when you come to cloud, because it's a software-defined environment and there's more capability for individuals in various teams to manage the whole environment because it's a software-defined environment, there is more people exposed to the full complexity, even though that complexity is less than the prior example of the on-premise complexity. Now, this is okay, that the perception of cloud as being complex, because what that means, in the same way as we've talked about other feedback loops in these mega trends, what this means is that we as a cloud provider are intrinsically incentivized to keep simplifying and abstracting things and making things simpler to manage because there is that perception. So in effect, cloud is like an abstraction generating machine because of this feedback loop. So I'll give you an example. So again, any of you that have tried to build a large scale distributed system with cluster management, scheduling, automatic scaling, and various other auto fault tolerant features will know, especially across a range of heterogeneous technologies at various levels in the stack in an on-premise environment, know that that is a very, very complex thing to do. You then shift to Kubernetes, which delivers that. The initial impression of Kubernetes is that's quite a complex environment, but it's way simpler than the prior example. It's just that there's people get to see the full totality of what Kubernetes can do. So it's perceived as being complex for a lot of organizations that don't want to have to fine tune it. There's some organizations that absolutely do need to do that and want to do that. But for those that don't, what you see is innovation in the cloud providers to provide more automated and managed services and more abstraction layers on top of that. So for example, our Kubernetes engine, GKE, we have a thing called GKE Autopilot, which is directly responding to the complexity of managing it. And then there's many other things where we embed that type of capability in kind of functionless, cloud functions and serverless architectures. And again, that's in response, the abstractions get generated in response to the perceived complexity. And a big part of this as well includes driving more automation and autonomic response in terms of how to handle security. So again, the cloud gets simpler and more autonomic over time because it's initially perceived as being complex, and that feedback loop works in everybody's favor. The next slide, please. So the final point before I close and we go to the panel is this whole concept of sovereignty and sustainability. So again, many of you will be familiar with the need for, in many countries around the world now, for data residency and data localization. And many countries are stipulating that the data associated with their citizens and critical services stay within that country. So for anything but the largest of organizations that have a large number of data centers worldwide, or the capability to stand up co-location or other facilities in countries, the only real option to be able to deal with residency issues of data is to actually tap into cloud providers who have got pre-positioned data centers in many countries around the world with residency controls where you can actually respond to that localization need. And then in addition to this, because of this wide geographic scale, many of the cloud providers have data center locations increasingly optimized for energy consumption and to be able to use sustainable forms of energy. So we have data centers that are powered by wind, powered by solar, they're located in a way that can tap into sustainable forms of energy. And again, so for organizations that want to manage their ESG and their sustainability footprint, it's often easier to be able to tap into that capability from the cloud. And this aligns quite nicely with this geographic dispersion. And so, which is why we describe this as kind of sovereignty meets sustainability. So again, just to wrap up, we think these are 8 forces that apply simply because of the very nature of the environment. And we don't see them going away, whether we choose, to drive them or choose to ignore them. They're just going to keep happening, and it drives cloud security forward. And I think the useful thing for everybody is to kind of figure out how can you just tap into these mega trends and keep raising the baseline by reducing the control and migrating to a cloud or cloud-like way of operating is ultimately beneficial for security. So with that, I'll close and hand back to Joel, and I think we're going to go for the panel.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Phil. You have certainly made a compelling case that we'd all benefit by moving to the cloud and taking advantage of all of those security benefits. So I look forward to discussing these topics in much more detail as we pivot to our panel discussion. So real quickly, my name is Joel Kaminer. I'm a senior director here at the NYU Center for Cybersecurity, and I have the privilege of moderating today's panel. So I will have each panelist introduce themselves in a moment, but a few ground rules before we get started. I've seen a number of questions in the chat about recordings and presentation slides. just know that after today's event, all of you who registered, all of the attendees will receive a link to the video and the presentation materials. I've seen some questions coming in already, but if you have a question for the panel, I encourage you to use the Q&A button, typically at the bottom of the screen, but I know it's different on every platform. But there's too much traffic going on in the chat. So if you want to talk with each other, use the chat. But if you have a question for the panel, please use the Q&A button and we'll do our best to moderate that. We'll have about 30 minutes for the panel discussion and also save some time at the end for additional Q&A. So really excited to dive into our panel discussion. So if we can stop the screen share for a moment and bring our panelists up. Welcome to all of our panelists. If we could, I'd love all of you to introduce yourself and perhaps briefly cover your own organization's cloud strategy and some of the security drivers behind that. Edna, would you like to start?
Sure. So first, thank you for having me, and certainly have a very special place in my heart for what NASA and NYU is doing in this space. I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Security and Risk Officer for our cloud infrastructure here at Microsoft. And what we have been doing is really driving towards something that builds off of what you heard Phil articulate. We have the capacity to think about overall operational resilience of our cloud and how we deliver the productivity and capabilities to our customers in a secure and ever-present fashion that is reliable. So doing the blending of these two concepts, and Phil, I know you've written as well a lot on risk and how we think about it, is something that I think is unique and also something that relates to the megatrends you're seeing, and the fact that as the hyperscale cloud providers, what we can do is think about these things not only at a large scale, but in an integrated way. And I'll put a plug in for cyber if I can. There is something that is unique about this group of people. While we may be, Phil is at Google, I'm at Microsoft, and I can tell you, the frightening thing is we actually like each other and compare notes. And there is a perception in many other places that competitors actually don't collaborate. In our environment, we understand while we do compete, that what we learn together ultimately brings everyone the benefit of the power of cloud.
That's great. Thank you so much, Edna. John?
Sure. Hi, John Bricky here. So for MasterCard, I would just say that my title doesn't really say what I do. So I'm a cybersecurity evangelist, but I do a lot of other things. I spend most of my time looking at cybersecurity innovation, leading an internal task force to speed the pace of innovation across the enterprise. While I report to the CISO, I work a lot with our product and service teams. I scout for new capabilities, work a lot with startups. I'm responsible for developing our cybersecurity strategy and creating the CISO's vision for the future. Additionally, I manage our partnership program. That's not really our contracts or vendor program, but it's our partnerships like the financial service sector, coordinating council, and many other partnerships that we have, well over 70 partnerships that we coordinate. And I lead 3 teams. One is our security awareness team, our cyber range, and our security researchers. And I would just summarize our cloud strategy as leveraging the multiple cloud environments out there to bring our network and our service edge closer to our customers, allowing them to choose where and how they want to connect with us, with security and privacy at the forefront. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Jasper.
Hello, my name is Jasper Graham. I serve as the Deputy Global CISO for Morgan Stanley. I'm tasked with cybersecurity underneath that hat. I have a couple other teams that sit underneath me as well, our threat hunting team, our global threat intelligence team, and our relationships and governance team, which interact with other partners and with government itself. So our sort of cloud strategy that we're looking at is we have a multi-pronged approach. So we have on-prem cloud environments, and we have traditional cloud service provider contracts that we work with to deliver the most secure environment possible that we can to our clients and customers. We have a gigantic number of apps. When I came on to Morgan Stanley, it's one of the things that shocked me is the number of internal apps and things that are on there. Each one is unique with its own challenges for migrating, going to the cloud, and the combination of back end and front end components. I think Phil made some pretty compelling points on some of the advantages of migrating when possible. So look forward. Thanks.
Great. Well, welcome, and thank you all for sharing your time and perspectives with our audience today. Really appreciate it. Phil, I just wanted to go back. Obviously, you just touched on at least 8 different areas that you think provide benefits back to the customers. Are there 1 or 2 that maybe provide the largest impact or think have the biggest return on investment for the consumer?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2. The first one is an economy of scale, where again, I think pretty much all of us have worked in enterprise environments where, and even for companies that had very, very significant cybersecurity budgets, it wasn't, you couldn't economically figure out, sometimes because of legacy, sometimes because of other reasons, how to just get some of the controls that you get in the cloud just so pervasive in the environment. And it really was because of scale. And, like I mentioned in the example, a cloud provider can think of investing like hundreds of millions of dollars on a specific control set, knowing that the return on that can be amortized effectively across a large fleet. Whereas even a large enterprise, a few $100 million on one control, you've got to be of enormous scale to make that worthwhile. And that's typically not the case in most enterprises. So this economy of scale dynamic works really well. I'll give you a current example where we're dealing with. So we have this capability we call confidential compute, which is encrypting all the way up to the processor, where data is only decrypted inside a secure enclave inside the processor. So not just is like communications disk encrypted, but all of memory is encrypted as well. All of other types of access is encrypted. Now, currently, that's quite expensive. It's a different processor. It's not in the entire fleet. It's available for VMs and Kubernetes clusters. But what we're working on doing with all of the hardware vendors that we consume into the servers that we build, we're looking to kind of, as much as we can over the next few years, make that just the default way of doing things. So again, imagine in the future, that's a default way, and maybe it's a little bit of a price premium, but essentially it's widely available. You're not, as an enterprise, going to go back to your on-premise 20, 30, 50,000, whatever number of servers you've got, and retrofit that with new processors with confidential compute capability in it. Whereas in the cloud, that's just like a momentary upgrade as part of your deployment, because the cloud provider bears the infrastructure and amortization management of that over the fleet. So that economy of scale is just such a powerful driver. The second one is that notion of cloud being the digital immune system, is just the fact that most organizations, especially in this kind of cyber skills crisis that's happening around the world, even well-funded, well-resourced large corporations, still struggle to maintain and get all of the right security teams in place. They're all doing great jobs. They're working really hard at this stuff. But the more they can tap into an environment where they're just getting upgrades to security continuously without having to do something that's tapping into this massive global ecosystem of threat and vulnerability research, other customers asking for features, just being able to sit back and take every update and know without really doing anything, you're going to keep getting more and more secure. That is just a tremendously powerful concept that I don't think we've ever seen in IT, at least as long as I've been doing this. And so I think all of them are important, but I think those, if I was going to pick 2, those would be the 2, because they're most transformational to, regular organizations that are seeking to improve their security continuously.
any of the other panelists have a favorite?
For me, it's about, just to pick kind of different ones than Phil, it's the CI/CD pipeline for me is tremendously important. We run a sec dev team, right? So we have a constant deployment of analytics based on world events, recent tweets, all sorts of other, shenanigans that take place that affect cybersecurity professionals all the time. So that CI/CD pipeline is extremely important to make sure that it's understood. You have quality assurance testing, et cetera, as things are deployed, you knew exactly what you're deploying, where it's at. The second piece to me is data normalization and standardization and how that data is stored. So if you need to do something at scale and you need to put that, in Parquet format or something and run Bloom filters or whatever against it at scale, you have an environment that the security apparatus on the back end will scale as it goes. And that data, when you make one adjustment to it, to Phil's point, if you change the schema or you change the storage, you're doing it at scale all at once, instead of sort of on-prem where you're system by system by system going through and saying, this is how I need my sysmon, this is how I need my audit D, et cetera, whatever, audit logs you're using at the time. So for me, those are just two separate ones that I'd highlight.
So Joel, I'll add into that a little different lens, which is, we've watched as the world has figured out the one-to-many realities of what you can win if you hit the supply chain with an attack, and how quickly you can perpetuate havoc throughout the users of the members that supply chain partner actually affects. So the benefit you really get is you're reducing your supply chain. And I should put a plug in for here in the US, April is Supply Chain Integrity Month. So I urge you to go look at DHS's CISA's website. We have a supply chain risk management task force that I have the privilege of being on the executive committee of. And it's a public-private partnership. But here's the beauty. We can actually drive in the hyperscale clouds a set of architectural obligations that are continuously monitored and vetted to give you a higher fidelity, as Phil talked about as well, not just on the operation of the way in which you are utilizing your cloud services, but on what third parties might be able to access you and prevent, to the optimum extent possible, not preclude 100%, the impact of that supply chain. And I think that's a real benefit. And the second part, because it's near and dear to my team, I own all of the sustainability and all of the risk on compliance. We also can spend that money to think about achieving your sustainability goals. So things like a massive fleet and utilizing liquid cooling inside of a data center. And we actually have a capacity now where we're turning on at school that will tell you your carbon footprint for your cloud service, so that you can meet the expectations of your own enterprise, as well as the expectations of your consumers and customers and the government regulators in the world arena in which you operate. And that's something that we can bring to the table, all because of cloud.
That's great. When people talk about deploying the cloud, we often hear two different models, right? There's sort of the lift and shift and taking some of our legacy work over to the cloud versus a native or cloud first approach. I'm curious, is the security impact and the benefits that we're talking about here, are they better, worse, different, depending on which approach you take in terms of moving to the cloud?
Well, I think we always encourage people to re-architect for the cloud to an extent, because many of the things that we've talked about so far today around continuous integration, deployment, using some of the things Edna talked about in terms of using some of the tools the cloud providers provide to improve your end-to-end software supply chain integrity. Some of the kind of the features around, for example, zero trust, not just for user access, but zero trust in production with things like service meshes and other things. You have to have your applications written to take advantage of that. And so fundamentally, it's useful to re-architect for the cloud. But one of the things I think all of the cloud providers have done over the past few years is recognize that it shouldn't be kind of a binary thing that you can only take advantage of the cloud in a when you've re-architected for the cloud. So there's all the cloud providers now have much better tools for doing kind of migrations and encapsulation of legacy services. So you're not quite doing lift and shift where you're bringing like a copy of the old environment to the cloud with all of the pain points and issues that come with it. But there's very, very straightforward now migration tools for servers and VMs that bring them into an environment that upgrade the zero trust approach to that as part of the migration, and a whole set of other tools where I think now it's less of a lift and shift, but a quicker adjustment in the security posture to permit even legacy technologies to take advantage of all of the benefits of cloud security and resilience. So I think it's becoming a lot more of a continuum rather than just this binary of lift and shift what you've got versus re-architect for the cloud.
John, you look.
Yeah, so just to add on that. So the ideal world would be, given the luxury of time and everything else, would be to re-engineer, re-architect for the cloud environments. I would say our teams have probably, as Phil said, there's a whole spectrum. And although we don't choose to lift and shift, it's been done just out of necessity, but that's more of a temporary fix. There are just a lot of benefits to be able to go greenfield in the cloud environment, but we have acquisitions at various stages. We have our own, existing legacy architectures and systems. So it is an ongoing orchestration across the spectrum.
So, Joel, I think we would be remiss as well if we didn't focus on, and I think, our colleagues Jasper and John would think about this as customers, the innovation, particularly John, given, you own that whole area, they're always thinking about what they want to do to innovate in their own environments. And the cloud can offer a unique partnership in that way. And we also have to bring scale on how we can deliver that to them. So if you start to think just about storage capacity and storage means, as well as just plain old fashioned space, as the demand for storage capacity increases and will do nothing but grow over time, bringing innovation to bear on things like storage on glass as a unique way to both save space, make it immutable, invest at the outset in the things you heard Phil already say. Some of us had prior lives. So I'm relatively new at Microsoft, and in a prior life, I lived deep in one of what I'd like to think is, the world's best hardware supply, networking hardware supplier. And that was an area where I brought to the table here the importance of hardware root of trust, cryptographically controlled and immutable identities. And then evidence, and what we're deploying now is evidence of compliance that can actually be shown across not only our own operational environment, but that third-party ecosystem. So I can give indicia of trust. All of us are working on how we look at Jasper or John and say, let me lift the blanket and show you. I'm sure all of us have a few bed bugs left, but this is how we are capturing them and where we're identifying them. That is something that is, I think, the path to the growth for the future. And what it does is deliver speed and additional confidence with empirical data for our customers.
That's great. I want to follow up on a comment you made earlier, Edna, as well, about we're all learning sort of the attackers are getting smarter, right? And they're going biggest return on their attack. And clearly going after a centralized cloud provider is a really big attack space and potentially really large impact. So, turning to the threat landscape, I assume we're seeing an increase in the amount and the types of attacks hitting the cloud platforms. Is there any insights or juicy nuggets anyone can share around that front?
I'll give you the juicy nugget is not that juicy. It should be obvious, right? I don't know, I'll echo what all of us say in this arena. Sometimes It's not the most innovative attack methodology. Sometimes it's the relentless pursuit of the small little hole into which you can crawl and identifying it. And the challenge is when you think about that third-party ecosystem, take the word supply chain and now think about customers and move it into third-party ecosystem. You know, our customers bring their own, if you will, attackers with them into our environment. And so part of that continuous monitoring and continuous uplift means we need to be aware of that. And so you will often see a customer or a third party to a customer become the new avenue of entree into a CSP. It seems like a circuitous route, but it's actually not. If it's 2 hops and you get that the bang for your buck and you get inside and you can start shutting down services, which is what we're seeing. If anybody's watching The Wonders of Lapsus, it reminds us never to underestimate our youth because they are worthy adversaries and quite creative. I'm seeing a lot of that increase.
You know, the other thing I would add, you know, building on Edna's point is you know, what we've got to remember is there's some very large organizations that are exclusively in the cloud, so-called digital native, but the vast majority of cloud customers, you know, run on multiple clouds and also have an existing sizable on-premise environment, and they have a bunch of other services in SaaS providers, and so they've got this kind of extended virtual supply chain risk. And you know, we've seen recently with the reported compromise of various kind of identity providers, where you know customers' on-premise environments and their potential connections to their cloud services are mediated through kind of identity providers, which if they're compromised, you know, results in kind of a chain of trust issue. And so we're increasingly on the lookout as part of protecting our customers for any kind of discrepancies in the things that are connected to us as much as what happens on the platform. And again, I think that's just the natural outcrop and dynamic of how the cloud providers partner with customers is increasingly we're going to keep looking at the means to use our perspective across a very large environment and across a very large customer base to kind of do that kind of early warning and provide those alerts for the benefit of everybody. But it's certainly, I don't think there's anything kind of unusual or new. It's just things that look different because of the scale that they happen at.
Yeah, as a customer on the back end of that, and to Edna and Phil's point, it's the stacked vendor supply chain as being a customer on the cloud service side that catches you off guard at times. So we're having to be a lot more diligent with our vendors to ask specific questions, because what we want to know is on the back end of 4 critical vendors, is there only one cloud service provider, right? Or are you distributed across that? And so that's what we're starting to see, right? And it's this stacking effect that people aren't accounting for, where you're working with 5 different vendors, but those 5 different vendors all sit in one cloud service provider. And so that's a scale. So it's great to hear that Phil and Edna's groups are taking a look at that kind of across the board. And if you can be the canary in the coal mine of some of these kind of things, that would be fantastic for folks that are sitting in the seats that I'm in.
In fact, it's interesting, Jasper, because like in my prior life, it's, and I know you know this, is, you know, it's interesting. Sometimes it's your 5 critical vendors, when you pull the thread of doing the 4th party, 5th party risk assessment, they're not only deployed on one cloud, but they're deployed on one zone in a non-resilient mode in one cloud provider. And so we, you know, not that I'm trying to drum up business, but we certainly encourage people to use as many zones and regions as possible to get resilience. Yeah.
No, you're spot on, and I have an example. I won't share here, but I absolutely have an example of exactly that case. So you're spot on.
And, you know, the old adage, supply chain 101, for those of us who grew up in that environment, never be beholden to a single supplier if at all possible. The reality is, in the connected environment, Jasper, that you just articulated, you have to dig quite a few levels down to figure out if you actually are.
Great point. I want to pivot just a little bit, being conscious of time here. there's certainly a lot of discussion, right, in Washington and in Europe about the need to further regulate big tech, perhaps similar to the increased oversight we've seen in financial services post 2008. So we have great big tech and financial services represented on this panel. So, and when I say big tech, right, not just social media companies dealing with disinformation and political interference, and the whole question around the impact of Section 230 protections from the Communications Decency Act, but just, curious on all of your thoughts in terms of the discussions taking place, the potential for increased regulation, and if you dare even a guess as to what might actually get passed and come down the pipe here.
Yeah, so I'm kind of not qualified to comment broadly on that, but I can give a kind of a narrower answer from my perspective in cloud. Is we're working with regulators and legislators around the world. I mean, I think as the side effect of the megatrends I talked about is more things are going to be on cloud, and therefore cloud becomes a more significant part of national economies and many kind of sectors worldwide. And so I think all regulators in every sector are looking at what they need to stipulate either directly or through their directly regulated entities to the cloud providers. And to be fair, other technology and other SaaS providers and telecoms providers, there's a general kind of recognition of this supply chain problem and the supply chain risk that needs to be more actively mitigated. And so, we're having those discussions all the time. And I think, speaking as a citizen in general, I can think it's appropriate that there's some degree of rules around the level of resilience critical infrastructure should have and how they should drive that on their supply chain, including cloud providers. The thing I think, from a cloud perspective, as I kind of mentioned, and Edna touched on this as well, is that the fact that we as cloud can provide a lot more resiliency options than companies have typically been able to economically create for themselves is kind of a net positive for resilience. And I think a lot of regulators are starting to see cloud as not just a risk to be managed, but increasingly actually as a means of managing and mitigating risk. And I think that's probably been the big change on the regulatory front.
Joel, I think as enterprises, we have an obligation to the extent we can afford the time and have the expertise to actually be at the table with the regulators. I mean, it's kind of funny. We have, as do all of our peers, we have a whole host of team members whose very function is to do precisely that. Blessedly, that is not my function. But unfortunately, I think, folks like Phil and Jasper and John and I will find ourselves pulled in because of the subject matter expertise or sit on an NSTAC or an ESF executive committee or one of these public-private partnerships that allow us a little bit of a unique opportunity that we may not have had in the past. The voice of the private sector is now, if not 100% equal, at the table and being listened to. And often our regulators and our government leaders have laudable and worthy goals. But I do find that sometimes the methodologies that they're thinking about, not because of ill will, but because of lack of information, are sometimes negatively impacting the very businesses that they seek to partner with. And so being at the table, even if you're small and medium business, we make room for that all the time, gives you an opportunity to sit, listen, participate, and voice where things might not achieve the goal. And that's a big win, not only for the private sector, but for every individual citizen in a democracy where that public-private partnership is happening. And I know NATO is looking at the supply chain revamping. I had the privilege of writing the directive for NATO on supply chain security. And there's a revisit on that. And that's a powerful force when you look at the countries that are involved in that. So being at the table is a privilege and a gift. And I encourage all my colleagues to consider whether they ought to be there or whether they ought to voice their views to those of us who are, because we don't speak for one company, we speak for the industry.
Bill, you must have a view of my screen, because I just got a text just before you were talking about a question from a regulator. I would kind of echo what Edna said about our government's not necessarily having any ill will, but there is a significant lack of understanding. And I know we're constantly engaged with different government agencies around the world. And the more we have a chance to discuss these issues with them, and in some cases educate them, and kind of give them a view of what the unintended consequences may be of some of their actions, or even in some cases help deconflict different agencies' proposals, so that they can kind of see how we can provide what they really want in a different way. So it's an ongoing partnership, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a balance between having a conversation in reality with the regulators about the problems that you're facing. And you want, to Phil's point, some structure around that. And at this point, you want to have a voice at the table, but you also want those guidelines and rules to be put in a way that you don't stifle innovation, whether it's in security or in the growth of the cloud, or whatever the new version of the cloud is going to be 15 years from now. We don't want to stifle that with what we have, but so you're looking for a framework that you can wrap around things that helps ensure confidence, but at the same time allows the innovation to happen.
Thank you all. Appreciate that perspective. I feel a little better about some of the dialogue that's happening around that topic, hearing your answers. Let me pivot to questions coming into the Q&A portal here. And I should note that all of you are tremendously well-known and well-respected, because many of the questions are being addressed to all of you on a first name basis. So you have a lot of friends and colleagues in the audience, which is great to see. But there's a number of questions related to the people dynamic, the talent management question around cloud security. We all know the ongoing issues just in cybersecurity in general, in terms of the workforce demands and not having enough workers to fill the open roles. Presumably that is even worse when it comes to cloud security, since it's one of the newer technologies and newer disciplines coming along. So I was going to read a quick quote that I saw in an article, and I'd be interested in your perspective. The quote is, people issues are a big part of becoming cloud native. Building, deploying, and maintaining applications in the cloud using cloud native technologies requires a different skill set than doing the equivalent in a data center. There is a significant talent gap in the industry right now. So upskilling, retraining, and hiring must have a deliberate plan associated with it. So maybe John, Jasper, from your side of the house, maybe we can start with you in terms of how are you handling this from a staffing perspective?
Yeah, I can start. Just one little footnote: we've increased our cloud security staff by 200% the last 2 years, and we didn't have one person 2 years ago. So, and that's just add to that the general talent shortage and challenge of increasing the pipeline. I did want to put one plug in for the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, or the NICE Cybersecurity Workforce Framework. So one way that we've been addressing this really for the past almost 5 years I've been at MasterCard is trying to adopt that standard so that we're talking the same language to educators, training vendors, and to the workforce. So NICE has 52 work roles. It's not as specific as cloud security engineer. I don't think that that's one of those in there, because this was developed actually in 2011, but it's constantly changing. And I'll just give you one specific example. Besides working with NYU Tandon, an extremely top-notch program that you have, we've reached out to other vendors specifically and said cloud security is, matter of fact, it was 4 years ago, we put it in as one of our priorities. So whenever we develop programs with any institutions, that it's in our top 5 of the competencies that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think you're sort of spot on, John, there. and some of the initiatives that you've kicked off. So in a previous life, with long before I joined Morgan Stanley and a couple other things, I spent some time with the U.S. government, decade plus at the National Security Agency. And one of the things they had there is a very strong development program, because you don't bring people in who have any experience with those sort of tools, et cetera, techniques, things like that. And we're sort of seeing that with some people that come or are previously working in cybersecurity. They don't have the cloud security skills that you need as well. So one of the things we've done at Morgan Stanley is we took sort of a two-pronged approach. One, we set up a cybersecurity scholarship and internship program to sort of get folks in and train them and push them in a direction from the education standpoint all the way out. So when they graduate, we have a continuous pipeline of that. Secondarily, due to the shortage that's going on, we need a way to take people that may not have the exact skills that we need, but have the aptitude and some baseline skills that we can then take and evolve through our development program to get them to where we need to help us on this cloud journey, right? And so that's some of the approaches that we're taking to sort of help us build a pipeline of talent, help retain that talent in the areas that we specifically need.
Phil, Edna, anything from your side?
The only kind of one small thing I would add is, what we find in working with a lot of organizations is, yes, it's about skills, but sometimes as well, it's about some subtle organizational changes. So an IT organization optimized to deliver in an on-premise style, they probably have the skills and capabilities to take advantage of the cloud, but sometimes they're not organizationally configured in the right way. So where we see the most success in customers is where they don't just train their people, they realign some of the teams in different ways to take advantage of continuous integration, deployment of site reliability, engineering techniques, a whole array of other things. It doesn't require dramatic reorgs, but certainly kind of different alignment. So we definitely encourage people to think about kind of team alignment for the cloud as opposed to just skills. Yeah.
I think, Joel, one thing that has worked is just having a boot camp. So we have boot camp programs, and anyone and everyone can come. And it's intriguing when somebody from legal or HR joins, a cloud security or cloud enablement boot camp, because they look at their role in a new way. And so the point of that comment is to say, think about cloud as a spectrum that the enterprise needs to understand across all of the skill sets that make the enterprise work, because it can only benefit everyone, not just an IT or engineering team.
That's great. That's great. There are an unbelievable number of questions coming in. So we will share some of those post the event. I don't think we're going to have time to get through all of them. We covered a lot of ground in this discussion. And so as we wrap things up, I guess I'd like to do just a quick roundtable with our panelists here. Any final thought you would like to leave the audience with? And if you're game, even a prediction on where cloud security will be 5 years' time. It'll be here before we know it. So I'm sure we'll see a tremendous amount of evolution and change as we look at cloud security. But any final thoughts? Jasper, you want to start us off?
I think as much as we sort of want to say, cloud is this big entity today, I think realistically, we've sort of only scratched the surface of global computing, distributed computing around this. I think as we start looking at things, I think Phil's comments around zones and things where it's located, I think it's going to become pretty common to see the data center concept be a very migratory thing that moves as the demand of your global customer changes. So I'm really excited about where we're going. I won't overly make predictions that got Nostradamus in trouble, get other people in trouble. But I think we're just scratching the surface here.
Great, thank you. John?
I would agree with Jasper and say that it's a journey and that we are early in our journey. It's a very deliberate journey. My only prediction is that it'll get better. And I'm looking forward to realizing a lot of the benefits that Phil discussed today. And my hope is that we solve the talent problem along the way. I wouldn't say problem, the challenge, because we can't just focus on technology.
Great. Edna?
I'll go bold and make a prediction. We will see members of very seemingly divergent backgrounds become part of the cyber family in 5 years, as divergent as those in biopharma, medical fields, teachers, and even human resources experts. I think we'll also see more regulation and legislation. And I think we will also see a third thing, which is the ability to move more swiftly, shift and accommodate our customers' needs, not only more swiftly, but also more pervasively as their demands change in both frequency and growth based on their own productivity and enterprise growth. Please don't write that down and talk to me in 5 years.
No, but I love it. Let's hope your predictions come true for all of us. Phil, as our keynote, you get the final word.
Yes, so no kind of prediction, but just an observation, just to remind ourselves to kind of look back at the progress we've all already made. So, I think, when we see people thinking about kind of moving from on-premise to the cloud, there's often this, and it's not just customers, it could be kind of consultants, other types of service providers. There's often a talk about kind of rethinking the security model from on-premise to the cloud. And one of the things that we see sometimes happening is organizations trying to recreate the on-premise security model in the cloud. And we don't just advise people to kind of rethink security in the cloud just because it's different. The great thing is, so, unfortunately, I'm one of the people that's been doing this for quite a few decades. And so I can remember back, like, the security first principles that we came up with in the kind of the 70s, 80s, early 90s, around least privilege, separation of duties, a whole set of really solid security principles that we now get to do in the cloud in actually quite straightforward ways. And I think sometimes we forget how much time over the past 20, 25 years in traditional on-premise environments, we've just had to compromise on those principles. And now, for the first time, we actually get to really implement those principles. And so it's less about a change in on-premise mindset. It's about using cloud to go back to first principles and actually achieve the security objectives we all defined as being correct, many, many years ago. And I think that's the tremendous opportunity. And as everybody said, we're right at the beginning of this journey. And the investments happening, all of the big cloud providers and everybody else are investing huge amounts of money on security. And that's, I think, the first time this volume of money has been invested. And I think it's going to bring huge benefit. And certainly, at the early stage of this journey, while there's much still to do, I think we're pointed in the right direction.
Well, in closing, I just a tremendous thank you to Phil, our panelists, Edna, John, Jasper. Thank you so much. And especially AIG for sponsoring and supporting our NYU Tandon Cybersecurity Lecture Series, this being the 12th such lecture in the series. I'd encourage our audience to visit the Cyber Lecture website and revisit some of our past events, starting in 2012 with discussions on public-private partnerships, big data, privacy, critical infrastructure, IoT, data science, cyber insurance, impacts on elections and our democracy, and really so much more. It's been a tremendous lecture series, and we look forward to continuing it with our 13th lecture. And fingers crossed, we'll be able to return to our in-person live events and bring everyone to campus here in Brooklyn. A quick thank you to our teams at the NYU Center for Cybersecurity and Tandon Online for all their efforts making today's event a success. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our NYU research and graduate programs in cybersecurity. There's really critical leading edge work taking place, and we'd love for all of you to engage and be part of our NYU cybersecurity community. Thank you for joining us today. This concludes our event.